Well, China has issued a new set of maritime rules which have stirred international concerns and worry, allowing the detention of foreigners for alleged trespassing in the disputed South China Sea. Well, the detention is allowed for up to 60 days. China claims almost the entire South China Sea, dismissing competing claims from Philippines. However, The Hague has squashed China's claims. A 2016 ruling states that China has no legal basis for such type of an action. Yet, these Chinese coast guards patrol the waters incessantly. These Chinese coast guards, alongside their vessels, patrol these waters and have transformed several reefs into militarized artificial islands. This has led to numerous confrontations between Chinese and Philippine ships in the contested zone and areas. Several collisions have injured Filipino soldiers as well in this spat. Well, the Philippines has accused China of inhumane behavior as well towards their soldiers. China has defended its new Coast Guard rules and claimed that the rules are to better uphold the order of the sea. Meanwhile, the United States has slammed China's domestic law and said that rules are detrimental to regional security. US has urged Beijing to follow United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea and also maintained that enforcement would be highly escalatory. We'll talk about this with our guest, but first up, I'm going to cut across to my colleague Pia, who's actually going to get down to the brass tacks and show us what this issue is all about and what is China claiming. Pia, over to you.
Indeed, at the outset, let's understand the UN Law of the Sea. The UN clause governs the conduct of 169 nations at sea. This was originally signed in 1982. It establishes a legal framework for all maritime activities across the high seas and across all maritime seas. You can see it divides the maritime areas into 5 main zones: the internal waters, the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zone, and the high seas as well. Of course, the internal waters and the EEZ are perhaps the most important aspects as far as the South China Sea issue is concerned. Now, the UN clause has been effective since 1994. It provides a legal status to these 5 zones that have been demarcated by this law. Of course, it was signed back in 1982, as I stated earlier. It allows state parties to claim 12 nautical mile territorial seas. So 12 nautical miles from the coastline can be claimed as territorial waters. Now 200 nautical miles from the coastline can be claimed as an exclusive economic zone. So this is the law that has been laid down that governs all countries that are party to it, 169 signatories. Now let's take a look at the dispute. China claims an area of the South China Sea that is beyond its exclusive economic zone, that is beyond 200 nautical miles of its coast. Now, this red line that you see on your screens over here is what China claims as well. This is a claim that has been contested by other neighboring nations, whether it is Philippines or even Vietnam, even Malaysia. Now, the Chinese government has cited historical control of the sea as its basis for the claim. Of course, you can see the map over here to provide better context to you viewers. Now, China presents its claim as a map that depicts 9 dashes. If you count the red dashes over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So these 9 red dashes are what China claims is territorial waters of China. This is of course contentious with Vietnam. You can see the blue line over here is what Vietnam claims as its own. Malaysia of course claiming lines under this yellow area, and the Philippines is claiming the lines that are demarcated by the green area. But China of course looking at claiming the Parcel Islands right over here, the Spratly Islands that are located over here, as well as the Scarborough Shoal that is located right here. This is, of course, brought about a case as well in the ICJ. But apart from that, China has constructed several artificial islands via dredging in the Spratly and the Parcel Islands. This is one such example of the Fiery Cross Reef. This is a satellite image from 2020. But the Fiery Cross Reef is not the only such military base that has been constructed in the South China Sea. In fact, one other such reef is the Mischief Reef that has been transformed considerably. You can see the transformation on your screen. This is 2012, when there was hardly any build-up of or militarization in this area. But here you can see a full-fledged Chinese military base in 2024. So the last 12 years, a considerable amount of build-up has taken place. Of course, I've referred to the Fiery Cross Reef that is located somewhere near Vietnam. But apart from this, apart from the Mischief Reef as well over here, there is the Subi Reef located right here, as well as the Woody Island, where a considerable build-up of Chinese military assets is taking place. They have jets deployed, missiles deployed, as well as airstrips that they have constructed. Now, there are several other assets that are also under construction. Right over here is the Quateron Reef that they refer to as Huayang. This is located somewhere near the Fiery Cross Reef itself, as well as the Johnson South Reef that they refer to as Chigua, that is also located near the Mischief Reef. Now, we've seen China, of course, continuously engaging in rather aggressive activities in the South China Sea, but we must not forget what exactly are the principles behind a rule-based order across the world, something that was, of course, articulated by Woodrow Wilson, who was the 28th President of the United States of America. His 14 points on the conduct of nation, of course, have helped guide all countries in the world as to how to operate their foreign policy. One of the most crucial points is regarding the freedom of navigation. He has said that the absolute freedom of navigation upon the seas outside territorial waters, alike in peace and in war, except as the seas may be closed in whole or in part by international action or the enforcement of international covenants. So this is one of the guiding principles. Let's take a look at how this helped influence the Atlantic Charter. That is another set of principles that guide the rules-based order today. There are 8 such principles. Let's go through them. The first one details that no territorial gains were to be sought by the United States or the United Kingdom. This is, of course, after a Second World War. It stated that territorial adjustments must be in accord with the wishes of the peoples that are concerned. This, of course, highlighted self-determination as well. Second most crucial principle that was laid out in the Atlantic Charter after the Second World War. Churchill, of course, Franklin D. Roosevelt, another crucial architect of the Charter. Moving on to the third principle that showcases that they respected every people's rights to choose its own form of government. The fourth principle is that they would try to promote equal access for all states to trade, as well as equal access to raw materials as well. Taking a look at the fifth principle, it is to promote worldwide collaboration so as to improve labor standards, economic progress, and social security as well. The sixth principle, of course, takes a look for peace under which all nations could live safely within their boundaries without any fear or want. The seventh principle details that under such a peace, the seas in particular should be free. Of course, a guiding principle which China has now consistently been violating. An ICJ ruling in 2016 also slammed China for having no legal basis to its 9-dash claim. And the last principle is pending a general security through a renunciation of force. Potential aggressions must be disarmed, something that China should keep in note. Back to you, Vineet.
Yeah, thank you for that extensive and elaborate description of what the issue is and what could be done about it. We'll talk about this with some experts who understand what is really going on. Professor Madhav Nalapad, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, with us on the program. Commodore Anil Jay Singh, VP India Maritime Foundation, also joins us on the show. Mr. Vijay Kranti, chairman of Chase, he's also with us on the program. Chirayu Thakur, international affairs expert, also with us on the program. Professor Nalapad, I'll begin with you, sir. Sir, this of course, this kind of a behavior, this kind of demeanor and the disposition by China is of course hinting towards a militarization of the South China Sea. It's using force for the sake of territorial claims. It's denying access to a lot of inhabitants, a lot of other countries who in fact are in it for, the elements that are found in the sea. And China is in this area definitely because of strategy, but this is definitely is going to have an implication on the regional stability as well.
Vineet, there's no question that China is a predatory power, but may I point out that both the earlier affirmation by President Wilson and the Atlantic Charter were mere scraps of paper. Let's be honest. This entire set of rules that is being set, these rules were meant to apply. They were not meant to, in the case of Woodrow Wilson, he was talking about sovereignty, about freedom in a context where you have France, Germany, and Britain. Germany, of course, was deprived of its colonies. They were having vast colonies. As far as the Atlantic Charter is concerned, one of the co-signatories was Winston Churchill. And he was very clear. He does not want any part of the British Empire to be free during his time in power. He was absolutely clear about that. So that was the value of the Atlantic Charter. The Atlantic Charter and Woodrow Wilson's Charter were meant to apply to people on both sides of the Atlantic, people who are of European descent. Today, these laws that the PRC is passing are making it more and more visible. There is a charter that says that what is defined as international law is not applicable to the people of China ruled by the Communist Party. And Vineet, may I point out that you just had a G7 meeting and you had the G7 leaders, all 7 of them waxing eloquent about sovereignty, about the rights of countries, about the need to deter aggression. Well, what about all this? What about the aggression committed by China way back in 1950s? What about its takeover of Tibet, Xinjiang, Manchuria? What about the takeover now? Now, in plain sight of the South China Sea. What about its trampling of the rights of many ASEAN countries? What is the G7 saying about that? As far as we can tell, they may be making a few token statements. They may be sending a few token warships. But these are symbolic. They're absolutely symbolic gestures. And frankly, this is the problem. The Chinese are allowed to be getting away with the perception that they are above international law. So this entire recital of international law that we heard, frankly, Vineet, it's a scrap of paper so far as the Chinese are concerned.
Mr. Kranti, so where do you stand on this? And of course, China has been saying there is a lot of historical context to what they're doing. But how do you reconcile, these competing sovereignty claims? Some, of course, are on historical basis and other are based on international laws. How do you reconcile this tug of war?
Unfortunately, as far as China is concerned or Xi Jinping is concerned, he has picked up the policy of reconciling with their own interest. And unfortunately for the rest of the world, especially the bigger powers of the world, and I don't know, it was a coincidence or an unfortunate coincidence or what we call it, that they are doing it, the new law comes when G7 was in action. This only shows that the rest of the world is nowhere in tune with its own interests. Whatever China or Xi Jinping, they decide and they announce or they announce some law, the rest of the world, besides saying a few words, I'm saying only words, verbal opposition to that, or no one is there, you can see, who is ready to challenge. China comes suddenly about South China Sea, as just now your colleague explained. They draw a set of lines on water of the sea, South China Sea. Sometimes it is called 9-dash line, or whether it is called 11-dash line. And this line on, imaginary line on the water announces that this area belongs to China. It's very funny. The whole world is accepting, and there are countries like what you call Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, Taiwan. All these countries are within that range, within that area which China announces that it belongs to China, and there is no real actual protest from the rest of world, which means the rest of world is accepting it. I think this is high time when Xi Jinping has to be stopped in his rails right now, because the way he is going ahead with his aggressive designs on countries in Asia and the rest of world, more you leave him like a mohalle ka gunda, more you give him leeway, more you give him concession, his position will become stronger and stronger, and day will come when the rest of the world will be in no position to challenge or stop China. I think one answer today to China's this declaration about the new law can be, okay, if you decide this law, then rest of the world will have a law that the Chinese ships, that no transport of China will be allowed through Malacca Strait. You know, the moment Chinese ships cross South China Sea, the Malacca Strait starts. And it is through Malacca Strait that, that China's more than two-thirds business works. So I think the rest of the world should also take some solid step like what China has done today. And one more thing I would add to what Professor Nalapat said already. China has been making laws from some imaginary, I don't know what from what position. Just to give you an example of how funny their laws can be, in 2007, the Chinese government came out with an order. The title of that, the law, which is called Order 7. And this Order 7, Order 5, it says that, just see, a country or a system who doesn't believe in religion. Mao has been calling religion as opium of as the opium of masses and rejecting it out right away. The same government, same party made a law. I'm saying they made a law like what they announced this new law today. That law says that no Buddhist tulku or a reincarnate lama is allowed to take new rebirth unless he gets a paper stamped by Communist Party of China permitting him to be reborn. Can you imagine? A leader can be so mad, or a country can be so mad when they are coming out with such funny laws. I think now time has gone when the rest of the world should only deposit their verbal
right, but you're absolutely right. But the question
now there's something solid has to be done, and one can be.
You're right, sir. Something has to be done. But Commodore Singh, the issue is that China has challenged the sovereignty of Philippines from time to time as well. They have launched several unilateral projects in the economic zone, which is obviously claimed by the Philippines. The Americans are worried that this intention of preparing, provoking and prosecuting is something which is going to lead to a massive instability in the region. Perhaps India too might be getting perturbed by these violations.
Well, I agree with you entirely. What China is doing in the Philippines in the disputed waters with its maritime neighbors is absolutely unacceptable. Its brinkmanship, this maritime brinkmanship, its grey zone tactics are very dangerous because they can lead to unintended consequences, the escalation of which may be difficult to control. Why China is going so far into this, I really don't know. What are they trying to prove? Are they getting provoked? Because the Americans are unrelenting. The Americans are continuing with their freedom of navigation operations. They're probably the only navy which has the capacity to do so on a regular basis in those waters, which irks China no end. But, coming back to the discussion from a maritime perspective of the freedom of the seas, Professor Nalapat and Mr. Vijay Kranti talked about the political other dimensions. But coming to the maritime dimension, both, the Atlantic Charter as well as Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, besides whatever else they may have, their political considerations may have been, were very clear about the freedom of the seas. And freedom of the seas is not a new concept. In 1602, Dutch lawyer Hugo Grotius wrote a book called the Mare Liberum, which was about freedom of the seas. And Mare Liberum till today is the underpinning principle of all legislation and all governance of the open oceans. The United Nations Convention of Law on the Sea, UNCLOS 1982, which PR referred to and explained in great detail, also respects the freedom of navigation on the open seas, on the high seas. In fact, even in territorial waters, if warships and submarines can take innocent passage, a submarine can be on surface. So even that is not inviolate like a land border or an airspace where somebody can't be permitted. So there is a lot of leeway given at sea because the seas connect, the seas unite the world. They don't divide the world. But China is taking undue advantage of this. Reference was also made to the 2016 PCA ruling, in which Philippines was, the Chinese claim was nullified, the Philippines claim was upheld, and China openly disrecognized that and said, we don't even recognize this decision. Now, it's all very well to say that, China should have done it and the world should have jumped on them, but China is also signatory to the UNCLOS. It must respect the international laws and conventions. It's a permanent member of the Security Council. It has to show some responsible behavior. How is it going to be one of the security permanent members and be responsible for global security when it does not even respect the very charters and rules it has signed on to? So these are the things we need to address, I think. As far as China's claims on the South China Sea are concerned, they're all so-called historical claims. This is ironical coming from a country which even less than 5 decades ago disowned any maritime heritage of its own. It didn't even have a navy. But in the last 5 decades, realizing that the key to global domination is through maritime power, has resurrected its entire maritime heritage, and started talking about about Zheng He and all these people and their voyages. It has built the largest navy in the world. It has the largest coast guard in the world. It has the largest maritime militia in the world. And so it is flexing its maritime muscle. What also must be understood is China at the moment is a navy which is trying to prove itself and assert itself in the world. They still do not have the confidence of a blue water navy to deploy in their far abroad. So they are trying to make their first island chain and second island chain so impregnable that people start fearing the PLA navy in those waters. And that is one of the reasons why there's so much of this bullying going on at sea, where they literally intimidate their smaller neighbors. Part of the blame I would also attribute to the US. If you remember when President Obama came to power, he talked about the pivot to the Pacific. But thereafter, they felt the word pivot was too strong and reverted it to rebalance to the Pacific. Now, at that time, when China started, creating these artificial islands, which were not recognized by United Nations, which were not recognized as islands which had a territorial sea around it or an EEZ around it, the US just sat back benignly and allowed them to do so. They didn't happen in a day. And they kept saying, China has assured us that it's only for peaceful purposes. Since when have China's assurances ever been for peaceful purposes?
Absolutely
and
right.
Sure enough, sooner rather than later, they militarized the island, they put missile batteries there, and now they claim that entire region. Yes, it is also going to impact India because 50% of India's trade comes from the east. We've set up the Chennai-Vladivostok economic corridor, which will pass through the South China Sea. All of this is going to have serious implications.
Absolutely.
Coming to
right,
another
sir.
point which Professor Vijay Kranti mentioned about blocking Chinese trade through the Malacca Straits. I know China considers this one of its major strategic vulnerabilities, but this is easier said than done. 70,000 ships transit through the Malacca Straits every year. It is very difficult to prevent any one country's ships from transiting through an open strait, recognized as a strait by international waters. Otherwise, we'll be doing exactly what China does, and that will be the end of any
You're
rule
quite
of law
right,
at
sir.
sea.
You're quite right, sir. Chirayu Thakkar, in fact, China's use of force and intimidation, towards smaller states is also showing a willingness to act like an expansionist power in the region. What do you think the saber rattling is leading up to? Is China trying to prove a point here? or is it genuinely trying to start something which perhaps is not going to end well even for China?
Good evening, Vinit, and thank you for having me. I think the answer is both. The panel before me, they have made some very fantastic points. Let me add a couple of them before I can exactly come to this point. See, the first thing is we talk about FONOPS and UNCLOS was repeatedly mentioned by all speakers, but the fact of the matter is that United States has itself not ratified this convention. So you can't ask China to uphold something which you yourself have not been a signatory to or has not been ratified it. So you don't want to apply something on yourself, but you want China to do it. So the backlash comes from China. We talked about ICJ ruling. There is not a single ICJ ruling that we are talking about. There is an ICJ ruling between Britain and Mauritius regarding the Diego Garcia, and that the UK is saying that this is a colonial possession. We paid for it in 1965. The Mauritius people are saying that it happened under duress. But they don't want to go with that ICJ ruling. They want China to go with the ICJ ruling. So let's not kid ourselves that this is all about rules-based order. Of course, what China is doing is aggressive. Of course, what China is doing is not in India's interest. But we are transitioning from a phase where there was an attachment or an affinity towards a rules-based order or a bit of it in the post-Cold War period, which is now we are again pivoting back to the period of might is right. And here, very important decisions have to be made by major powers. It's not only G7, but powers like India, what they want to do. Because if you remember, it looks like Munich all over again. There was a period when Neville Chamberlain thought that, if we let Hitler do this much or take this much territory, it would be the end of it, and then again we can live happily in peace. But that didn't happen, and it led to the Second World War. Perhaps this is a period where the countries of the major powers of the world have to come together and think that what is the threshold, how much we will let China get away with, and that is something that has to be kept in mind. But again, if you can't thwart a declining power like Russia, if there is so much fatigue with war in the world, then can you actually stand up against a power that has risen like China? These are some of the big questions in international politics these days. So what China is trying to do is, it is just keep on moving one step at a time, a salami tactics on all sides of its borders, whether it's our continental borders or maritime borders, be it with India, be it with its Southeast Asian neighbors. It occasionally ratchets up tensions with even Russia as well. And what we are primarily seeing is China is trying to establish its centrality in the new world order one step at a time, and is trying to see how much it can get away with. And at some point, it will meet resistance. When, how, what are the signals? I think that is the big question of international politics that we all keep watching.
All right.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.